All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Granite Files, where we have been investigating the county of Henrico putting a chemical drug in the drinking water called hydrofluorosilicic acid. Now, during this investigation, I have managed to make friends with people all over the United States, from New York to Florida to Wisconsin, okay? And that's what I want to talk about today is Wisconsin. So what I've noticed is that our government is shirking their duties, right? Imagine that. Now, it's taken me a while to put a word to illustrate what the government is doing. And I think shirking their duties is the correct term that I would like to use. So, what am I talking about? A little while ago, I had a conversation with a lovely individual from Wisconsin, from the DNR. DNR is the Department of Natural Resources. And for those of you who are in Virginia, they are essentially like the Office of Drinking Water. So here in Virginia, we have the Virginia Department of Health, and one of the departments or agencies, you could call it, is the Office of Drinking Water, and they are the watchdogs, right? Well, in Wisconsin, the watchdogs would be the Department of Natural Resources, DNR. And when I was speaking to this gentleman, he was very gracious with his time. He's very thoughtful with his words. And essentially, what he communicated to me was that DNR is shirking their duties, right? That's how I would frame it. The state law requires the Department of Natural Resources to require pure water. And DNR says their position is, well, we actually take our marching orders from the health department and from the EPA, right? Now, he framed it initially as like they don't have a choice. They're only going to prohibit water fluoridation when the EPA orders them to prohibit water fluoridation, or if the health department prohibits them for water fluoridation. It's the problem with that is the statute isn't written in such a manner, right? So the statute says that the department, meaning DNR, shall require pure water. And it doesn't say that the department shall defer to EPA and shall defer to the health department, right? And so, in my opinion, what DNR is doing is shirking their duties, right? And so I'll briefly go over the Wisconsin state law again, and then I will show you how ridiculous it is for DNR to essentially take their marching orders from EPA and from the health department. Now, I don't necessarily fault DNR for seeking guidance, right? They love saying guidance. So I don't necessarily, I understand essentially why DNR is looking to EPA and to the health department for guidance, because in a sane world, these organizations, these departments, they would be good resources. The problem is that they're not. Now, why do I say that? Well, because DNR, they assume that water fluoridation is safe because the health department endorses it. They assume. Now, I have done a records request in Wisconsin to the Wisconsin Health Department, asking them for the records relied upon to assert that it's safe for pregnant women and babies to ingest diluted hydrofluorosilicic acid. And they responded back with this nonsensical response, kind of dancing around saying that it's likely we don't have the records and so forth and so on. And so I followed it up by having a conversation with the records officer and said, can you clarify? And she went bananas in pajamas and totally freaked out and said, we don't have any records. We don't have any records to say it's safe. We don't have anything. Okay. We don't have anything. And she must have said it at least a dozen times. We do not have any records to support a claim saying that this is safe for pregnant women and babies to ingest. So I said, okay, why not just respond back with, we have no records, right? That's how VDH responded. Virginia Department of Health, I did a similar records request. I didn't use the exact same language, but it was pretty close. And Virginia Department of Health, they responded back by saying, we don't have any records to support that it's safe for pregnant women and babies to ingest diluted hydrofluorosilicic acid. But here are some links that we do have, right? Like, hey, we don't have what you're looking for, but, you might be interested in these other resources that we do have. So very cooperative, right? Very reasonable. But Wisconsin Health Department, they did not want to put in writing that they do not have any records. I mean, she went cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, to say the least bit. And so when she said at least a dozen times, we don't have any records, I said, can you please put that in writing? And she said, no, I'm not going to put it in writing. I'm not going to put it in writing. And I was like, you kind of need to put in writing that you don't have any records, right? And so I then said to her, well, is this conversation being recorded? Because a lot of times these health departments and so forth, they record all these conversations. Because then I thought, well, I'll just do a records request for the audio recording. And she then panicked and said, no, it's not being recorded, but it's being recorded now, And I was like, okay, now that it's being recorded, will you state that there's no records? And then she responded by saying, I'm going to have to talk to my lawyer. Like, if you don't have any records, why would you need to consult the attorneys to say that you don't have any records showing that it's safe for pregnant women and babies to ingest diluted hydrofluorosilicic acid? So they had a very weird energy in the health department. So, okay, so the bottom line is DNR, Department of Natural Resources, they're shirking their duties and saying we're relying on the health department to give us the marching orders. And the legislature didn't say that DNR can shirk their duties and defer to the health department to make sure the water's safe, right? The statute doesn't say that. And then I said, okay, now that you know that the health department doesn't have any records that they rely upon to say that it's safe, and a federal judge has said this poses an unreasonable risk of injury, would you guys like to change your rules and regulations, in essence? And so, the gentleman was like not really sure what to do with that. Okay, so the other thing that he said was that they defer to the EPA and the Safe Drinking Water Act. Okay, so let's talk about this. The Safe Drinking Water Act says no substance shall be added to the drinking water for preventive healthcare purposes unrelated to contamination of drinking water. Okay, the full context of this is essentially the Safe Drinking Water Act says that the feds cannot require any substance to be added to the drinking water for preventive healthcare purposes. In other words, the federal government cannot require that fluoride go in the drinking water. They cannot require lithium go in the drinking water. They cannot require Valium to go in the drinking water. You get the point, right? So The Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, they don't want to take the feds don't want to take responsibility for water fluoridation. Okay. So I said to this gentleman, if you are wanting to, get your guidance from the Safe Drinking Water Act, then if they're not going to, support water fluoridation, then, you guys shouldn't either, right, as the primacy agency. Okay, that seemed to kind of stall them out a little bit. Then I said, let's look at the EPA. And I proceeded to go down a laundry list of quotes from Dr. William Hertzie, I believe, and I can show you what Hertzie said. And Hertzie said that that the solution to pollution is dilution, admitting that what our local governments are doing is they are taking pollution and they are putting it into the drinking water to dilute this pollution from the fertilizer industry, in essence. So I found it to be astounding. Now, if I was somebody in Wisconsin who wanted to stop water fluoridation, and perhaps I've tried to go after a locality and I didn't get the results that I desired, I may go after DNR for shirking their duties. Now, what would I do, right? I would do a declaratory judgment, injunction, and writ of mandamus to provide pure water under the law. That is what I would do, because I believe that based on reading the statute, the Wisconsin statute, I don't believe that DNR is doing their job, right? Because it says that they need to write up these rules and regulations, reasonable rules and regulations. Well, water fluoridation poses an unreasonable risk of injury. So how can you claim that it's reasonable to allow localities to put it into the drinking water, right? So let me pull up these documents so I can really go over everything with you, and I think it'll make a lot more sense. So let's get into it. Okay, guys, so this is the pure water statute that I was referencing in Wisconsin, okay? And it's 280.11, pure drinking water, okay? Right off the bat, pure drinking water. Does that mean you go out of your way to purchase a recycled hazardous waste byproduct to put it into the drinking water? No. Does that mean that you put any drugs, you go out of your way to put any drugs into the drinking water? No. So a basic reading of this law, a plain reading of this law, means that you remove contaminations from the drinking water to make it safe to drink. You don't go out of your way to purchase contaminants to put into the drinking water. Unnecessary contaminants, right? Drugs, unnecessary drugs. That doesn't promote pure water by any stretch of the imagination, okay? So it says here, 280.11, pure drinking water, powers of department, okay? So the Wisconsin legislature wrote a law instructing the department what their responsibilities are, right? So this is all about the department. The DNR is the Department of Natural Resources. What are their responsibilities, right? And does the Department of Natural Resources have the legal authority to shirk their duties and say, we're not going to decide what pure drinking water is. We're going to take marching orders from the health department and from the EPA. And when the EPA tells us to stop shirking our duties, and when the health department tells us to stop shirking our duties, then we'll go ahead and stop shirking our duties, right? So, okay, what did the Wisconsin legislature say to the DNR? What they said was the department shall means you gotta do it, buddy, okay? The department shall, after a public hearing, prescribe, publish, and enforce minimum reasonable standards and rules and regulations for methods to be pursued in obtaining of pure drinking water for human consumption, and the establishing of all safeguards deemed necessary in protecting the public health against the hazards of polluted sources of impure water supplies intended or used for human consumption, including the minimum reasonable standards for the construction of wells and pits. Okay, now enforce the minimum reasonable standards and rules and regulations. So I would imagine, if I'm a sane, rational person, that a reasonable standard would be, hey guys, you can't go out and purchase drugs and put it into the drinking water, right? You can't go out and purchase recycled hazardous waste byproducts to put in the drinking water. I think that's a pretty good, a pretty reasonable standard. I think that should be a pretty reasonable rule or reasonable regulation, that you can't go out of your way to take a pollutant and dilute it into the public drinking water. I think that's reasonable. And you know who else thinks it's reasonable? A federal judge. A federal judge said this poses an unreasonable risk of injury. So it's a bit difficult for DNR to, one, claim this promotes pure water, because it doesn't, and two, to claim it's reasonable when a federal judge said it poses an unreasonable risk of injury. And the other problem for DNR is that doctors cannot write prescriptions, fluoride prescriptions for children, right? The FDA put the kibosh for fluoride prescriptions. So as it stands now, if a mother wants to give fluoride drops or tablets to a child under the age of 3, they cannot, okay? No child under the age of 3 is allowed to get a prescription from fluoride from a doctor. Children who are at low risk of tooth decay, they too cannot get a prescription, and children who are at moderate risk of tooth decay cannot get a prescription, because this is an unapproved drug that causes cognitive neurodevelopmental damage, right? This is a cognitive neurodevelopmental hazard. So essentially, this law makes it clear that DNR is responsible for coming up with the rules and regulations. DNR is responsible for pure drinking water, right? And so when this gentleman, and God bless him, I mean, he seems like a really great person. He seems like a very smart, intelligent person. But for him to say that he stated, this is the way I'm understanding it based on the conversation, he stated that his hands are tied, that he cannot write a rule or regulation unless the health department tells them to write a rule and regulation forbidding fluoride. He said he can't write a rule and regulation unless the EPA tells them to write the rule and regulation forbidding fluoride. I don't think that that's correct, right? Nothing in the statute says that DNR is required to get their marching orders from the health department or from the EPA, okay? It just doesn't say that. They have a duty, a legal duty, in my opinion, to make sure that water fluoridation is not in. They have to make sure water fluoridation is in line with 280.11 pure water. And it's not. Water fluoridation does not promote pure water. Water fluoridation is not reasonable, okay? And I really do think that if somebody wants to put the kibosh to water fluoridation in the state of Wisconsin, I would go after DNR for shirking their duties. If you submit a declaratory judgment asking a judge whether or not DNR, whether or not water fluoridation if there's statutory, so whether or not water fluoridation is legal, right? Is there a law that authorizes water fluoridation? Does this law mean that DNR can essentially has the authority to grant permission to put fluoride in the drinking water? Because that's what's happening. Is DNR is saying that, yeah, we say that water fluoridation is fine and dandy like cotton candy, okay? And I don't believe that DNR has the authority to do that. I would then say if water fluoridation is not in line with the state law, then they need to do an injunction to stop water fluoridation, and then do a writ of mandamus requiring DNR to enforce this law. So DNR needs to be compelled to obey 280.11 pure drinking water. I don't think that DNR is actually obeying this law. That's the bottom line. I do not think that that DNR, Department of Natural Resources in Wisconsin, is actually obeying the expressed statutory authority that the Wisconsin legislature granted to DNR. Okay, now I've already told you that, okay, they want to shirk their duties and say, well, the health department says that it's fine. I said, my response was, your responsibility, DNR, your responsibility is to make sure that it's safe. So you assume that water fluoridation is safe based on, you assume that the health department thinks it's safe. I've done a records request, and the health department does not have any records to claim that water fluoridation is safe for pregnant women and babies to ingest. So your trust in the health department is misplaced. You have the authority. You have the responsibility. And the duty of care was on DNR to make sure that the health department was providing guidance that was founded in, common sense, right? But okay, so that's the health department. And then we've already spoke about the Safe Drinking Water Act. The feds don't take responsibility. They don't require it. So I now want to share with you what the EPA said, because this gentleman said, until the EPA says that there's a problem, we're not going to stop, right? Now, again, that's ridiculous, because this state law doesn't say do whatever the EPA says. Keep allowing recycled hazardous waste to go into the water until EPA tells you to stop. No, that is not the way the law is written. The law is written in a manner that the DNR is supposed to require pure water. So DNR needs to, in my opinion, DNR needs to demonstrate that water fluoridation, one, promotes pure drinking water, and number two, that this is a reasonable standard. How are you going to do that when a federal judge said this poses an unreasonable risk of injury, right? All right, let me show you a few quotes that I found from, I believe it's Dr. William Hertzie from the EPA. I just came across these about 2 days ago, and it's extremely disturbing. And I read this to this gentleman from DNR. I'm not going to mention his name because the gentleman is very, he's cooperative. He's providing explanations. Do I agree with what they're doing? No, but at least he's having a conversation. And so I think that that's important. So I'm not going to put this guy on blast. Okay. So let's jump over to Dr. William Hertzie. All right, everyone. So this is going to be EPA's Dr. William Hertzie on water fluoridation. Okay, these are some of the quotes that I pulled from this video. He said, putting the stuff in the drinking water is in essence just a hazardous waste management tool. It has nothing to do with dental health whatsoever. He also said, you are using your body as a sink for the fertilizer industry. Okay? He then says, EPA hydrofluorosilicic acid has been a protectant pollutant status of fluoride within EPA. A Richmond Waterworks operator told me about this next quote. I did not realize where he got it from, but apparently he got it from this gentleman, Dr. William Hertzie. He says, the solution to pollution is dilution. Okay? Hydrofluorosilicic acid meets the criteria for classification as a hazardous waste. Toxicity, reactivity, and corrosivity under 42 United States Code, Section 6901. And this is going to be Dr. William Hertzie. He's a senior scientist, risk management for the U.S. EPA. His credentials is extremely impressive. So you guys can do a screenshot and then scrape these links if you like. He then says EPA identified this is EPA's assessment. Okay, this is separate. EPA identified 2 well-established children's health effects, dental fluorosis and neurodevelopmental toxicity, as the most sensitive, i.e., occurring at the lowest exposure levels. Harmful health effects associated with fluoride. Okay, this is recent. This is in 2026, where the EPA acknowledged that there are well-established health effects such as dental fluorosis and neurodevelopmental toxicity. This is the National Toxicology Program, and they said the conclusion was NTP, National Toxicology Program, concludes that fluoride is presumed to be a cognitive neurodevelopmental hazard to humans. Okay, that's straight out of the NTP. Then we have Food and Water Watch Incorporated versus the United States Environmental Protection Agency, case number filed in 2024. The finding was that the federal judge said, and this was a seven-year long trial. Okay, it was a fact-finding trial, so it was very unusual. Our courts are set up to be adversarial. This is different. The judge's job was to figure out whether or not fluoride causes harm to the brain. And the judge determined that his finding was that community water fluoridation at the level recommended by the EPA poses an unreasonable risk under the Toxic Substance Control Act. EPA doesn't actually recommend water fluoridation. Okay, after this ruling, they came out and said, we don't recommend water fluoridation. We've never recommended water fluoridation. We don't take responsibility for water fluoridation. Okay, I then told this gentleman I did not tell the gentleman from DNR about the mock press release. Many of you are probably already familiar with this because I do understand I'm probably preaching to the choir, but in case there's new viewers, so this gentleman, William Hertzie, as well as another EPA insider, they sued the EPA because of how the EPA wants to allow water fluoridation, okay? And one of the things that came about is years ago they raised the MCL, and William Hertzie, he had a problem with it. So to blow off steam, what he did was he wrote up this press release to in order to kind of burn off steam, and it wound up getting out. And this is what he said. It says, the Office of Drinking Water, in conjunction with OMB, proudly presents their new and improved fluoride regulation, or how we can stop worrying and learn to love funky teeth. Up to now, EPA, under the Safe Drinking Water Act, has regulated fluoride in order to prevent children from having teeth which look like they have been chewing brown shoe polish and rocks. The old standard, which is based upon the consumer's average shoe size and the phase of the moon, generally kept fluoride levels below 2.4 milligrams per liter. EPA, in response to new studies, which only confirm the old studies, and some flat-out political pressure, has decided to raise the standard to 4 milligrams per liter. This increase will allow 40% of all children to have teeth gross enough to gag a maggot. EPA selected this level based upon a cost-effective study which showed that it's cheaper for people to keep their mouth shut than to remove the fluoride, okay? And even though he's blowing off steam, he's telling the truth, okay? When you ingest fluoride, it damages your teeth. It turns your teeth a different color. It hardens your teeth and makes them more brittle, okay? It damages the structure of your teeth. And so because the EPA decided that they wanted to raise the MCL, he understood that more people's teeth are going to be jacked up, or what he calls funky teeth, okay? So this is DNR. How can you look at the label for hydrofluorosilicic acid that says danger, poison, do not take internally, and think that this promotes pure water? It doesn't. Fluoride is not used to make the water safe to drink. It is used in order to alter the look and structure of your teeth. Now, anyone who has any common sense understands that this stuff isn't just going into your teeth. It's concentrating in your bones. There's a lot of evidence to show that it causes an increase in bone cancer. It concentrates in your brain. It calcifies your pineal gland. It displaces iodine in your thyroid. What part of this label says that this is reasonable to put into the drinking water? Here's some images of sodium fluoride. Now, a lot of localities have shifted from using sodium fluoride, which is a powder, to the hydrofluorosilicic acid. But how do you look at this? Look, the label here, let me zoom in on it. This is what's on the label. It says target organs, heart, kidney, bone, central nervous system, gastrointestinal system, and the teeth. What? So because it targets the teeth, therefore it's okay? This is not a nutrient, folks. This is not a nutrient, and it doesn't promote pure water. Well, all right, everyone. There we have it. What do you think? Is the DNR in Wisconsin shirking their duties? Do you think that they have a legal responsibility to write rules and regulations that forbid water fluoridation? I think yes. Do you think that they have the authority in order to essentially grant localities permission to put fluoride into the drinking water? I think not. I think the Wisconsin legislature wanted the DNR to make the water pure as possible. And I do not think that the legislature wanted the DNR to allow extra drugs to go into the drinking water. So I would do a writ of mandamus to require DNR to obey the law. Okay, that's what I would do. Now, again, I would not do that on its own. I would do a declaratory judgment to declare whether or not DNR even has the authority to authorize localities to put fluoride in the drinking water. I don't think that they do. And then if DNR does not have the authority to grant localities permission to put it into their drinking water, then do an injunction to force DNR to stop granting that authority, and then force DNR to provide pure water as defined under the law. That is what I would do if I lived in Wisconsin. But like always, everything here is in my opinion. This is what I am alleging. So everything is, as Baron Coleman says, allegedly, 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 in my opinion. And nothing in this video should be construed as legal advice. This is my opinion. So that is it for today. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to give a thumbs up, leave a comment below, and share it with other people. And I will see you next time. Thanks, guys.